Namaste. Welcome to Vichar Manthan. My name is Rajashekar Asireddy, and I will be the chair for this evening's fireside. Vichar Manthan, or VM for short, is a public engagement platform exploring contemporary British issues through Hindu civilizational lens. Vichar and Manthan are Sanskrit words. Vichar means ideas, Manthan means to chant. Our aim is to explore ideas earnestly. We are not here to provide a perfect solutions. Rather, we provide the rigor, ask questions, and give you an opportunity to challenge those ideas and which you can manthan yourself in your own time. Today, we're going to explore what will be our working lives look like in 30 years' time, what technological advancements are ahead of us, and also what can we expect from emerging fields like artificial intelligence, biotechnology, 3D printing, and virtual reality. And on top of that, would we be still working 5 days a week, or are we exploring heights of the culture? What is going to happen to these corporations? There will be few corporations, or like now, there will be many? And how dharma is going to navigate us through this uncertainty? To manthan this topic today, is joined by David Wood. David is the chair of London Futurist Society and also fellow and board of director at the Institute of Ethics and Emerging Technologies. David's main focus is to bring radical transformations in society and humanity, enabled by accelerating technological disruption and mediated by social and political reaction. Welcome to the VM, David. We have in total around 60 minutes, where initial 40 minutes, we will be manthaning between speaker and myself, followed by questions from the audience. I encourage you to join the discussion by asking questions in YouTube live chat function. David, we start with your opening remarks. Can you address what are the main technological developments that will take place in next 30 years' time and which will affect our jobs and working life? Over to you, David.
Well, first of all, Rajashekar, many thanks for setting up this incredibly important discussion. Generally, people don't appreciate quite how much technology is changing, and that technology is probably going to change even more in the next 20 years than in any previous 20-year period in history. My background is a technologist. As it happens, I spent 25 years in the mobile computing and smartphone industry, where I saw lots of change on a trajectory which was slow change, disappointment, followed by fast change. Oh my goodness, change. Why did nobody see such a big change coming? And in my time in the smartphone industry, I came to realize that what was happening with smartphones was actually just a foretaste for what's going to happen in many other fields. And some of them you mentioned. There is transformation with greater artificial intelligence, robots that are more generally skilled. There will be drones flying around. There will be robots with artificial emotional intelligence. There will be changes in medicine and healthcare, which will again change how jobs work. Now, to set this in context, I'd actually like to refer to our previous forecast. I am chair of London Futurists, and I'd like to share a prediction that was made by another futurist in London quite some time ago, as it turns out. Actually, he made this forecast in 1829. And he was somebody called George Cruikshank, and you can see here a picture that he drew. Later in life, George Cruikshank, by the way, became well known as an illustrator of many of the books by Charles Dickens. And if any of you grew up reading Charles Dickens books, it's possible you might have seen an illustration, but like this. Anyway, what's in this is a forecast of a change in jobs due to technology. It's actually a change in jobs for horses. Now, it's difficult to read this, so let me read bits of it for you. What the horses are saying is, oh my goodness, well, dash my wig, a coach without horses. And in a side drawing, there's another picture of a fiery steed. And the horses are worried. What is this technology going to mean for their future? There are also some dogs in this picture, and the dogs are talking to each other. One of them says, "What do you think of this new invention?" And the other dog says, "I think we shall soon have meat cheap enough." It's a bit of a cynical take. Says there won't be work for horses to do because there will be steam engines doing horses' work instead. Therefore, horses will no longer have any role in society and they will be turned into dog food. This is a prediction of fewer jobs for horses. And in a way, I'm offering today a similar prediction of many fewer jobs for humans because technology is going to do much more work. But the reason I show this picture is that actually, for the next 100 years after this forecast was made, it was actually a bad prediction because steam engines did not spell the end of jobs for horses. There are people who actually study this. There's a historian who's looked at horses at work for hundreds of years, and actually there were more and more horses employed, as it were, in the following decades. This is figures from America, but things were similar in other parts of the world too. And horses' population grew over these decades much faster than the population of humans. Why? Well, it turns out there were many things that the machines couldn't do. And this is a note from a journal called The Nation, pointing out that although the trains could do certain jobs, we needed horses still to bring people and goods to the trains and take them away from the trains. We could have steam engines in paddle steamers, boats, but again, they required more and more horses. And so it looked like technology would actually be good for jobs for horses. Just as today, many people say, don't worry about technology removing all jobs from humans. Technology actually creates more jobs rather than destroying jobs. But let's look a little bit further at what happened to these horses. People did argue throughout this period of time whether horses would be able to do the other, continue to be able to do the other jobs, or whether new kinds of machines, new kinds of robots, if you like, new kinds of cars, as we might call them now, would be able to do transport over the rest of the country, not just on railroads. And many people argued against it. The intellectuals of the time, if you like, said, no, we will never have cars in cities and in farms and so on. Why? Because they're too dangerous. They have too much foul smelling black smoke. They could cause fires. They're too noisy. Nobody's going to put up with them. And they're too heavy. They're going to damage the streets. No, no, no. The jobs for horses will be secure. So if you look at this famous picture, some of you might have seen this before. This is a picture taken in New York on Easter morning in 1903, when at the time people would go out in their finest clothes. And what you can see in this picture is horses, 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 horses. Except if you look very close, there is one weird car in the middle. So if you were there, if you were a champion of horses continuing to have jobs, you would feel quite safe. But let's move forward. How long? Just 10 years. There's another famous photograph taken in almost the same place 10 years later on Easter morning, 1913. What do you see? Cars, cars, cars. How many horses are in this picture? I'm told if you look very closely, there is one horse. So eventually the cars got better due to people like Henry Ford, due to lots of improvements, and the population of horses employed plummeted. Peak horse, to use a phrase, was 1910, and in the decades afterwards, there were fewer and fewer horses employed. There was nothing much that horses could do that machinery couldn't do. Us. What about humans? We humans aren't horses, of course. We humans have brains. We have many other skills, whereas horses generally were employed for their muscles. And it was quite easy for machines in due course to out-muscle horses. Well, it is my contention that at some stage in the next 50 years, we will see a similar transition as between these two 10-year photographs, that we will move from most jobs being done by humans with a few bits of assistance from automation and robots, to a situation fairly soon afterwards in which robots are skillful enough in all ways, due to artificial emotional intelligence, due to more precision, that there will be very few humans in the workplace at that time. And we have to look forward to what that might mean. And it could be terrible or it could be wonderful. But if we don't think about it in advance, it's very likely going to be terrible. So we have to anticipate that transition. But we also need to anticipate what's going to happen as we get close to that transition, at a time when technology is changing lots of aspects of work, but hasn't yet put everybody out of work in the same way. And my advice for that, and we're going to explore it in discussion, is that each of us must become much better at working alongside technology. We must become more skillful at coexisting with automation and adapting to rapid change in our jobs, rather than assuming that what we learned in our early stage of our career training will be good for us for the next 20 years. That kind of job for life is no longer going to be possible, and instead we're going to see rapid changes in every career.
Thanks, David. I know it would be quite difficult to predict exactly what sort of jobs will be there and what percentages, but in very high level, how do you see in the next 20 to 30 years time, what percentage of jobs will be automated and what sort of jobs will be coexisted along with the machines, and how this whole job market is going to look like?
Well, the first thing to say is that I think 100% of jobs will be transformed by greater automation. Whichever job we're doing, lawyer, nurse, doctor, engineer, artist, psychologist, politician, whatever. All of these jobs will be changed, and they already are changed, and the pace of change will change. And so the tasks that are currently in these professions will change, and that things which currently require human touch, things that are much better done by humans, will increasingly be taken away and will be done instead by automation. So what this means is that currently, if you might need 100 humans to do all the tasks in a particular profession in a company, in the future, you might only need maybe 10 humans to do this. And the other 90% of the work of these humans will be done instead by automation. So there's likely, other things being equal, to be the demand for fewer humans in these roles. Now, people will argue that, well, that means the company will have more profits because they're able to use lower cost robots, working them longer hours without having to pay sick leave and all the other benefits. So they'll have more profits, so they'll be able to employ humans for other jobs. And to an extent, that's true for a while. But over time, more and more of every job will be done by automation. So what we can look at is to focus on what computers and what automation can't do yet. And that's going to change. But for the time being, the computers are not completely good at tasks involving general knowledge. They're not completely good at tasks involving creativity. They're not completely good at tasks involving compassion. They're not entirely good at tasks involving abstract thinking. Now, all of these are going to change. So in 50 years' time, I don't think there's anything that humans can do now which couldn't be done better then by automation. But in the next few decades, there's going to be changes in all of these areas. And so that's the kind of skills that people should focus on being on top of in the next decade or so.
And just going back to the example you mentioned there with the horses, we had initially people thought there going to be any job for the horses, but we ended up having more horses in a decade time. Do you see with the advancements in the technologies, there will be a new set of jobs which require more people is needed with artificial intelligence or with the new technologies? Or do we see by more and more automation with the tasks are done through the machines and the humans will be completely idle and complete with the leisure?
So of course there are new jobs. The job that was on my job card for a long time, software engineer, was something that my grandfather, when he was young, could not have made sense of. And my son had something on his job card for a while that said something like neural network engineer. What on earth was that? So there are new jobs, of course. But I don't think these new jobs will remain unchanged for a period of time. The task of a software engineer is changing continuously due to more automation being available. The task of neural network engineers is changing all the time due to better software being available. So yes, there will be some new jobs, and people need to get used to having what's on their business card. If we still have business cards, maybe they'll be virtual instead of on cards. We have to get used to that changing. And in order to become comfortable with changing, means a change in our psychology often. It needs more comfort with change rather than becoming defensive about what we are. And we need to be more comfortable with change, which means being more comfortable often with failures too, because we change from being an expert in our current job to being quite inexpert when we have to learn new skills. And that can be quite shocking and surprising for us. But we need to be comfortable with that, because unless we do move into that new areas, we will soon be eclipsed and left behind by the growing tide of automation. So we're going to need more comfort in change.
But David, the amount of technology is changing, the rate at which it is changing. Is it sustainable at all? Because the people are can adapt to that level of change and so much fast. Previously, the level of change was fast, but not that fast. With the AI and the new technologies, the change is very exponential. And was that even sustainable, or people is going to not able to adapt it, and we're going to just it's going to bring back the whole of this progress?
Well, these are very important questions. There were quite dramatic periods in the past when there was large-scale disruptions over the course of a generation or so, in which lots of jobs were lost. Many more people used to work in farms, and then automation came along and there was less need for people to work on farms, but they could go and get new jobs in factories, for example. So there were some periods of disruption, and there were quite socially dangerous periods. There were revolutions in many parts of the world, and some thinkers such as Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels predicted there would be a workers' uprising. And there were workers' uprising of various sorts in parts of the world because they felt they were being left behind. And that's still possible today. There will be many people who feel increasingly left behind by change. This is a serious point. So we have to, first of all, help people to adapt to change. But also we need to understand there will be people who aren't able to adapt to change. And we shouldn't just blame them. Hey, you are lazy. You should have been smarter. You should have educated yourself more. You should be ready to redefine yourself from being a factory worker into being a Java CSS expert. You know, not everybody can make that change overnight or even in a period of time. So we need to have a broader social contract that has a safety net aspect in which we look after each other better. If we don't look after each other better, there will be more and more despair in society. There will be more angry people. It's already happening, in fact. In some parts of the world, a long trend has changed. You know, for a long time, people would live longer than before. But in some parts of the world, people are living less long on average than before. This is something even before the COVID outbreak. People were dying of what's called deaths of despair. And that's a terrible outcome, which is arising because people feel left behind by the transitions that are taking place.
We're going to come into the technologies and how we're going to adapt to the new skills. You just mentioned COVID, and we're just coming out of this COVID lockdowns, and the restrictions are coming out. Do you see the working from home is going to become norm, and are we completely moving into the direction of home working, and the technologies are is going to enable us forever?
I believe that we are going to have many more people working remotely more of the time than before. Now, it's going to vary from job to job, of course, but I think it's quite likely that a big reversal is going to take place. So if you go back 2 or 3 years, most people in an office job imagine they would spend maybe 44 weeks of the year in the office and maybe 8 weeks of the year out of the office on business trips or holidays or whatever. Now, in the future, it may be the other way around. We would spend maybe in the whole year, maybe just 8 weeks in the office, co-located with our fellows, building rapport with them, and maybe 44 weeks working remotely. And of course, there are some things that don't work so well when we are remote, but we are getting better at doing these remote things. And there will be some companies that are better at doing them than others. These are companies we might even say that are born remote. And sometimes people make a distinction between companies that are born digital and companies that are trying to adapt to being digital. And it's harder to adapt compared to being born. So I think in the same way, there will be companies that are set up from the beginning to have good processes to cater for employees who are remote, and they will tend to do better, and the ones that can't adapt will be left behind. Because after all, there are so many advantages to not having to commute, so many advantages to spending more time with your loved friends and family, and more people are saying, you know what, I don't want to go back to that old normal. I'm trying to find a new normal, and the technologies of automation will help. Now, there are going to be more. There's going to be an adoption of more augmented and virtual reality. We haven't talked much about that yet. I think that's very important too, that will allow us to have an even better experience. So maybe in 5 years' time, when we're having this meeting again, I would have on a headset and the audience would have on a headset, and we'd be looking around and apparently seeing each other, and maybe even shaking our hands, and our haptic feedback would give us that experience. And it might be in some sense an even better experience than either this remote experience, which we're having now, or an in real life connection. So I think that will happen. And of course, it was predicted for a long time, and it didn't happen for a long time. And this is the pattern I mentioned right at the beginning. There's a slow period of disappointment in which technological predictions don't seem to be bearing out. Virtual reality has been predicted for a long time. And then because of various factors, the technology becomes good enough, or social trends interfere and push us into a new phase. And that, I think, has happened with COVID. And we're not going to go back to the old normal, thank goodness. And we're going to find out what a new normal is going to be. And by the way, the new normal is not going to be static. It's going to be changing dynamically.
Sure. Before we move into some of those economy and other implications of this, David, just want to quickly touch base on currently, if I understand you correct, there will be a major job losses, and a lot of automation is going to happen in next 30, 40 years time, or the 50 years time, which you mentioned. But how do you see this progress in next 10, 20 years time? If somebody need to think about their careers or education, various things, thinking about it, do you see these things are rapidly, corporations are adapting very soon as this technology changes? I know the working from home, we adapted very quickly. But the new technologies, especially the virtual reality or augmented reality and artificial intelligence and 3D printing, some of these new technologies, are the corporations ready to adapt this and make people redundant?
Well, it's going to depend on whether there is social support for people no longer working in quite the same way. And one thing that's happened as a result of the COVID pandemic and the lockdown is that the governments in many parts of the world have said, we need to help out. We need to rearrange some of the resources in society to help people who, for no real fault of their own, can no longer earn a living the same way as before. So the furlough schemes and whatever. We're going to need something similar. And we should probably talk about what that will involve. And that's going to make it easier for the transition to be smooth rather than being chaotic.
Sure.
And some companies will adopt this technology, and they will be more technologically successful, and they will have a competitive advantage against the companies who keep on employing humans in, quote, the old way, with the various drawbacks of having to have a large human staff, as well as the benefits. But as automation is able to duplicate more of the benefits of humans, then there will be more companies in various parts of the world who are able to succeed. This is already happening, by the way. If we look at the sizes of the 3 most significant companies in Silicon Valley, if we compare them with the sizes of going back 20 or 30 or 40 years to the 3 largest companies in Detroit, Motor City, you know, Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, they could be compared in terms of they had roughly similar revenues, but the motor car companies employed many, many more people than the Silicon Valley company. How do the Silicon Valley companies have similar revenues? It's because they use automation more. And this is part of a winner takes all phenomenon. And especially when digital platforms provide the competitive advantage, the ones who have the best digital platforms will tend to succeed. So the companies that make these changes, that use automation instead of fallible humans in greater parts of their work, will tend to be successful. And the ones that don't will be left behind and they'll go out of business, which means we need to have government support or social support for people who are no longer employed.
We're going to come back into the social support, but before that, you very nicely got the topic into Silicon Valley and some of these big corporations. And as we've seen in the last 10 years, especially the tech companies and even the retail companies, these very few big corporations are literally becoming bigger and bigger. There are very few corporations now, they control most of the technology, even some of the supply chain as well. And over a period of the time, is this sustainable at all? Having just some companies having the complete wealth and the technology, as well as very less manpower, and not many companies having the same sort of options. And over a period of the time, we end up having fewer companies across the world, and they're controlling the whole world. Is that sustainable? And is that going to cause what sort of problems it's going to create?
I'm very worried about that possibility. There's a phrase from the 19th century historian and politician Lord Acton, which is power tends to corrupt. Yes. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. Yeah. Great men are nearly always bad men. And if we look at great politicians, often they were later bad men. You know, they started off with great humanistic ambitions, but in many cases, they became more autocratic. I would add to what Lord Acton said, great corporations are nearly always potentially bad corporations too, as they have monopoly powers. They cease to be so innovative. And if we look at the history of great large companies in America, we look at some of what happened in the steel industry, in the railways industry. Companies started off by being very innovative. As they took more power, then they held on to their power by very devious means. And eventually, the politicians broke up these large companies in things called trust busting. And I think we have the same risk with these powerful tech companies. And I say this not because I think the people who are running them are evil in the traditional sense, not at all. They're often very idealistic. Their motivation is absolutely to serve altruistic purposes, to share information around the world, to connect the world. But in reality, they are driven in practical terms by keeping their share price high, by meeting the needs of their customers, who, by the way, aren't us, they are the advertisers, and so forth. And so there are increasing risks. And as these companies are even more powerful, they will be able to ignore even what governments say to them. And we must not let that happen.
I think especially one of the challenge I would see in this one is, especially with internet, some of the social media corporations, one of the big advantage of having these companies are worldwide, it is all well connected. You can talk to anyone, you can do anything, and everything is seamless. It's like in a global village. And at the same time, these corporations are challenging some of the fundamental institutions of our society, right from democracy to some of the core of our institutions. If we start splitting, or if we go that route into splitting some of these organizations, are we going to defeat the main purpose of some of these corporations or the services they are providing?
So I'm not sure that splitting them is the right answer. I mean, there might be some case to split, for example, Instagram and WhatsApp away from Facebook, for example, but I'm not sure that's the core thing. The core important thing is that these companies remain under democratic control ultimately. In other words, that if politicians acting on behalf of the whole of society wish to change various operating parameters of these companies, that they are listened to, and that the corporations are not able just to ignore the politicians. And this is difficult, and anybody who tells you there's an easy answer here, you should mistrust them. Getting the right regulation is one of the hard, difficult problems. In fact, a good career option is to get into this field of smart, skillful regulations, somebody who understands the technology involved in the various corporations, but also who understands the legal possibilities and the various frameworks. And that is a good career for the next 20 years, definitely. And we need more people who are incentivized into that area. So we need to, as you say, maintain many of the benefits that have been created by these global companies, but without being naive. You know, there's a saying, I think by John Bunyan, the road to hell is paved by good intentions. It is insufficient to rely on the good intentions of the people running these corporations. We have to have a grand public discussion about limits to the power and things that we are not comfortable with, and so that ultimately it is they exist for the people rather than just for the 1% or for their shareholders.
I know. I think that's a whole of a completely in a very vast discussion, especially in the regulation on the social media and the tech companies. Probably we won't be able to much go through that today, and especially when we are quite behind the regulation side of it, catching up with a lot of these corporations. But instead of that, we'll go back to what you mentioned about social support, David. And if in a very soon, or maybe in the next decade or so, if a lot of automation is going to catch up and a lot of jobs will be automated, and if the people are going to be redundant or unemployment is going to rise, how do you see this support? What sort of support do we require from the government or from the society to help and support unemployed people?
So the main thing is that people should be able to have a very good quality of life without needing to spend much money. So this is sometimes called the abundance economy.
Okay.
That some things which are already low cost, like many of the online services, are free. There's Wikipedia. You don't pay money for Wikipedia. There's an incredible set of educational resources available online. That's the start. Now let's have more and more things prioritized so that the important thing is lower cost and high reliability, rather than evaluating politicians on whether they are boosting GDP. GDP means more money being spent. Well, actually, that's not the key thing. The key thing is whether people can have a high quality of flourishing without needing so much money. And that means we should be prioritizing good, low-cost housing rather than just building lots of expensive houses that rise in value. We should be prioritizing low-cost but effective healthcare, which means prevention, rather than having to spend a lot of money once people become ill. And that's the overall picture. Now, people will still need some money. And so something like a universal basic income payment, partly universal without any conditions, and partly in response to people becoming involved in community activities. They could also receive some credits for that too. But we need to become more comfortable with that. So that's a system. But at the same time, we need to change the prevailing philosophy that's in much of society. And the prevailing philosophy, it's got different names in different parts of the world. I'm not sure what it is in the Hindu culture, but in traditional European cultures, it was sometimes called the Protestant work ethic or the Calvinist spirit, which meant that unless you were working for a living, you were a second-class or a third-class citizen. You were a lazy, good-for-nothing. And, you know, if you really were a proper member of society, you would go out and you would work. Now, that needs to change. We need to recognize that it is a good quality. A good person needn't necessarily work. We already think that to an extent. We don't expect our children to go out and work anymore, though in the past we did. We don't expect people to keep on working after a certain age. Well, we need to extend that. We need to be comfortable with people working fewer hours. We need to be comfortable with 4-day weeks, 3-day weeks, 2-day weeks, and so on. And that requires a change in mindset. It's a philosophy that actually used to be very important. It used to be vital to the well-being of society that people had this attitude, but it's no longer the right attitude. And we have to become comfortable with giving up that old attitude and embracing a new attitude.
Sure. David, you mentioned quite a lot of things in there and a lot of concepts. Even though that is a short answer, I think we need to unpick quite a few things from them. Especially, let's start with the universal basic income. If that is going to be a reality, looks like maybe everyone is now pretty much talking about it. And in the pandemic, we are kind of seeing the taste of it. How do you see this is becoming as in a reality? Where do we going to get government all the funding from? Fewer corporations, no taxes, and income for everyone. How does this going to work?
Well, there's various ideas on that. I think there should be more taxes on the very successful companies. This is something that the G7 has been discussing, and I think it's entirely right. There should be no tax loopholes of the sort that exist now, which allow these very large companies to often pay almost no tax.
But
Many
is
of the
that
rich.
even possible, David? Sorry to interrupt you there, because what we have seen in the last 5-10 years, some of most successful companies are ended up paying 0.05 or 0.05% of the taxes. They are always found in a places to go from one country to another country when you are operating across the globe. Is that even possible to have, because we don't have any global governance, is that even possible?
So you can make global agreements without having a global government. So there
Yeah.
are many global agreements on all kinds of things. Global rules for how to play football. When teams get together, doesn't matter what your political regime is at home, you aren't allowed to have more than 11 players on the pitch at one time. For example, you've all got to have the same acceptance of the rule, offside rule, whatever it is. And when you play cricket, you've all got to accept the same LBW rule. If the ball pitches outside the leg stump, you're not out, even if it would have gone on to hit the wicket, and so on. So you can have international agreements, and that may sound flippant, but there are very important examples of international agreements. One of the most successful was the agreement to avoid the emissions of various chemicals called the CFCs, which were causing the hole in the ozone layer, that was discovered 30 years or so, that the ozone was being damaged by chemicals which were currently at the time used in refrigeration and in aerosols, and the world agreed. And I think that is the agreement. The Montreal Protocol has been signed by 196 countries, which is every single country in the United Nations has signed up to that. So that's an example of what can be done. Now, of course, it's hard because in the case of tax havens, the countries that are allowing big corporations to headquarter there, they are benefiting in this sort of a selfish way there. They're getting some tax, which wouldn't happen if they all agreed to have the same corporation tax. But all countries can realize, hey, it's actually in everybody's collective interest to set this sensible floor on what the corporation tax should be, that will therefore avoid these very rich companies not paying tax. And so that discussion is going on.
Okay.
It's taking a while, and we're going to have to fight various ideological countries, but I think it can be done. Similarly, there are individuals, very rich individuals, who manage to hide many of their assets in offshore vehicles. The Panama Papers from a few years ago showed that there were billions, maybe even trillions of money outside of their taxation system. Well, we need to clamp down on that, and that's going to require global cooperation. It doesn't need a global government. It just needs enough people to say, hang on, it's in our shared interest to do that. And let's keep campaigning for it. And if it doesn't work the first time, let's be thoughtful and let's be creative and let's try a different approach. Let's not ignore that issue and give up on it, because that's one way of raising a great deal more money. Now, there's other ways we can talk about too, but that's certainly the start of the issue.
Sure. This one, okay, if we look into the corporation tax, probably for the Silicon Valley or the developed countries where some of these major corporations are operating, probably would work. But what is going to happen if countries like Africa or African subcontinent, where we don't have much of these technological or advancement companies, and they ended up being in a service consumers than any sort of new corporations? Would that work in that parts of the world?
So we need to change from just thinking about universal basic income being a national thing. We need to think about the international dimension exactly. And that will almost certainly mean more funds going from the developed world to the developing world without expecting repayments. So there is some initiatives along these ways. And it wouldn't just be a one-way street, because with the right investment, many of these developing countries can build up their industries. We talk about Africa, but actually Africa varies a lot from country to country. And some of them have got better thriving economies than others, and we need to encourage more of it.
Sure.
I should point to people to the new book by the former British Prime Minister, Gordon Brown.
Yeah.
It's called 7 Ways to Save the World. And he has very interesting chapters on the need for continuing trends which did take place to an extent
Yeah.
after the global financial crash in 2008, 2009.
Sure.
When there was some forgiveness of debts, which he was involved with at the time when he was Prime Minister, but he thinks there is more that can be done as the world comes out of the COVID crisis, which will involve generating more cash and sharing it with the developing world. We haven't touched on where all this cash comes from. I said some of it will come from the taxing more effectively. There is a lot of money in savings, as it happens. A lot of people have saved money, and that's good in a sense, but it means that it's not being employed as profitably as it could be done. So we need to find clever incentives for people who have saved lots of money to feel comfortable investing some of that money in longer term initiatives. There's sometimes called the savings glut, and it's sort of unexpected. Many people don't know about it, but it is the case, in fact.
But going forward, David, if there is not much drive to earn money, because what we are saying is everyone is going to get a basic amount, and there will be a low-cost services and a low-cost living, and there is not much incentive for people to even earn. And even if you have lots of capital or a lot of investments, and if everything is cheap, and is that even going to work out? And because you're not taxing much on into it, and there's a low services, and the people are not going to spend much money. Where this all seems like a big puzzle. It doesn't fit into the current system.
Well, we do need to change our thinking about many ways. What do people ultimately need? They don't need money ultimately. They need things like energy. They need things like food. They need things like shelter. They need things like various possessions. And money is one way to help that to come about. But if we make a really good job of the Green New Deal, there will be more and more renewable energy available almost on tap with, first of all, solar energy, potentially not too far into the future, various new forms of nuclear energy, such as fusion. And when that's possible, people will have enough energy without needing to pay money for it. And what will maintain it is systems of automation. And what will maintain the automation is more automation. And there will be some human oversight, yes, but increasingly we won't need so much of it. So we will have a good quality of life without needing to pay so much money for it, because it will come from the energy which is from the sun and from collecting other elements. As for food, we can do a whole lot more with synthetic biology. So instead of our terribly inefficient and inhumane practices of agriculture around the world, in which we slaughter billions of sentient animals all the time for meat and for fish, well, in the future, we won't need to do that, because we will be using synthetic biology, sometimes called cultured meat or clean meat or cell meat or whatever. We will do that, again, at very low cost, and providing healthier food for everybody. And again, it won't require so much money. Now, I don't want to say we're going to live anytime soon in a world without any money at all, but I think we will have more of an abundance and less of scarcity. There will be some role for money, and people will be able, if they wish, to earn more money by doing a certain number of things, but it won't be the be all and end all. It won't dominate people's lives in the way that it has done often in the past.
So if you can quickly reflect on this particular question, David, before we move on to individual and the free time, how we're going to spend that time. Because currently we value quite a bit human capital in economic terms. And if in the future, if that's not going to be the case, are we seeing this whole capitalistic society, the way the current system works, is it going to be not the case, and we're going to have a different sort of system altogether?
I think it's an evolution of what we have today. Yeah. Capitalism means many things. At heart, it means that people are free to work on what they want to work on. They are not told by the government what to work on. They are able to create companies, they're able to adjust the price, they're able to invent new services, they're able to move from one industry to another industry. These elements of freedom are very important. And if we try to centrally plan everything, we won't get anything like the benefits that we get from that free market. But the free market has its failure modes. Free markets often end up in failures of the dreadful sorts, which is why we have to guard against monopolies. We have to guard against information asymmetries and lots of other things that economists worry about. So what we actually have is not an untrammeled free market. We have, I think, one of the most important inventions of the last few hundred years. We have the mixed market, in which there is a lot of freedom, but there is government oversight from time to time that sets various rules and regulations. So we can have more of that. So we will still have freedom.
Yeah.
People will be free to work on various things, and there will be constraints, especially in the transitional period, which constrains people not to do various things, to set taxes on, for example, carbon emissions. That's another way, by the way, in which we can raise money to pay for a UBI. We can have a carbon tax. And by the way, we should also have, sometimes it's called a Tobin tax, which is a tax on financial transactions, because a lot of these financial transactions aren't actually particularly good for the society as a whole. So we can tax that too. And that will also...
I have to stop you there. Sorry, because we have a few things I want you to cover before we move on to audience Q&A. We already got quite a lot of questions, and I will ask our audience to start sending even more. We'll try to cover as much as we could. But before that, there are a few things I wanted to quickly ask you. If individuals have more and more time now, as we are saying, like probably it may start with 4-day a week, as Iceland is already experimenting, and it seems to be very successful now. And maybe we're going to have more and more time in hand. How do you see individuals spending this time, and what they should be preparing for it?
So we'll be able to do lots of different things. It's the kinds of things that people often do when they retire, or the things that people wish they could have done if they had been healthy when they retire. Mm-hmm. It's also some of the things that the aristocracy of the past did, because they didn't need to work either. They had money provided for them by the feudal society or whatever of the time, and they often got involved in what? Science, literature, exploration. So I think a lot of what people can do in the future will involve literature. It will involve exploration of virtual worlds, exploration of created worlds, exploration in due course of outer space too. I think we will explore music. There's a huge amount of music to explore. Personally, I look forward to exploring my first love, which was lady mathematics. There's absolutely wonderful. Not everybody will enjoy that. So basically, the answer is creativity and exploration. And that can include what we sometimes call spiritual quests too, exploring higher consciousness. And the important thing is that people are given the freedom to pursue whatever their passion leads them into.
But is that not going to create some sort of problems in the society as well? Not everyone is creative mindset. Not everyone wanted to spend a lot of time on learning new skills and doing the things. Sometimes we see in our society on a day-to-day basis, whenever people got money and the free time, what sort of social behaviors we see on the roads, and how do we going to control these social behaviors and make people make use of their leisure time properly? How could we do that?
It's a very important question, and one reason why people misuse money or misuse the talents given to them is because they are depressed or really unhappy, or they see no vision in their lives. And that's why they tend to pursue more materialistic or self-centered or short-term visions. But when they have a bigger reason to live, and when they are supported, often when they are supported by members of the community, it's surprising how people change. And we can often be shocked at bad behavior or bad attitudes of some people. But then later, when we meet them, they have changed. And that, I think, is one of the most important teachings of all the great religions. Which I adhere to, which is that people can change given the right support and given the transformational experience. So I think that with the right vision of a better future, people will tend to use these opportunities well, rather than squander them and deploy them on hateful purposes.
Okay, and just one thought on that one, David. We are seeing from the nations paying universal basic income, and so pretty much state is controlling how much you're going to get, what it is. And with the social behaviors also, I would imagine if you wanted to control, they might end up putting some sort of policies and the procedures and the structures. And is that going to create a big state completely? They are financially supporting you, and also they are pretty much controlling the social behaviors. Is it going to cause individual freedom?
So again, a great question. I am in favor of having a state that's strong enough to control the big corporations, which are very
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah.
But there are dangers, of course, to having a powerful state, which is why we also need a powerful society.
Yeah.
To control the state. When I mean a powerful society, I mean a separation of powers. I mean an active, independent press that's not afraid to speak truth to power. I mean a judiciary and legal system so that no politicians are above the law. I mean a good alternative political parties so that whichever one is in power at the moment can have reasonably be voted out if it is no longer working on behalf of society as a whole. And people look at this and you can have many choices of weak state, weak society, strong society. As I said, I think we need a strong state and a strong society. And it's not going to be easy to get there, but if we don't do it, we're likely to be dominated instead by strong corporations and other strong crime lords or strong fundamentalist groups, political groups, religious groups, which will cause chaos. So that's why we need to have the good guys, as it were, being strong, as well as just leaving it to the bad guys to be strong and do terrible things.
Before we move on to audience Q&A, David, so looks like there is a big role for the social organizations, either NGOs or the social organizations, and I don't know, like VM and any sort of an organizations started stepping into it. How do you see the social organization's role, and what sort of leadership changes? Because the framework is going to completely change, the way we're going to work in the future, the way the society is structured. What sort of changes do you expect the social organizations and the leadership to evolve into to handle the situations in the future?
So these various social organizations will have the same challenges that I mentioned being faced by many of the world's companies. And some of them will fail and will become irrelevant or become fossilized or become dinosaurs, and others will adapt and will be able to live up to their strengths whilst they're still being relevant in the changed world. And so the same message which I give to companies is also the message I give to these organizations. You need to be agile, you need to understand what's truly important, and you need to be able to find ways to adapt that in the significantly changed world in which we are moving into. So agility, but also taking advantage of collaboration, because we are all stronger when we are in a community of people that support us with strong, not just intellectual support, but strong emotional support too. Because in order to cope with change, it's not just a matter of IQ, it's a matter of EQ or even SQ, spiritual competence, So we need that, and we can get that from our community. So the organizations that can do these things will likely have a significant role in the future, and some, unfortunately, may not be able to make that adjustment.
Okay. I want to talk about some more of those details, but David, I think we need to move on to our audience Q&A. And also just for info, David, probably we might be running 5 minutes, probably longer than what we initially planned. Hope that's okay with you.
No, this is an important discussion, so let's give it the time it deserves.
Thank you. The first question is from Antonio. And his question is, to what extent are policymakers underestimating the skills mismatch for new jobs that will arise as automation advances?
I think many policymakers are indeed underestimating it. So, Antonio, I think you've got a good point there. Mm-hmm. People tend to look at the technology of today, and they say, well, we've got to adapt to the technology that's today that we're not already taking advantage of. But in reality, the technology is going to be even more disruptive in quite short time. So the artificial intelligence we got today is probably going to be eclipsed quite soon by new developments in artificial intelligence. It's the same with VR, it's the same with virtual conferences and so on. So I think most policymakers are putting insufficient priority on the skill to learn how to relearn. You know, when we were young, we were taught the 3 R's. The most important things are reading, writing, and arithmetic. Well, today, you know, we need to be able to unlearn and relearn. That's possibly the most important skills, and policymakers aren't putting enough focus on that, and nor are they putting enough focus on the soft skills. You know, they all talk about STEM, and STEM's important: science, technology, engineering, maths. But we need this artistic side as well. So we need to emphasize the A, and it's STEAM rather than STEM. And A needs to include the broad range of things like history and foresight, as well as just hard technical skills. And most policymakers aren't talking enough about it, because most of them don't appreciate quite how much is going to change likely in the next few years.
Okay. This next question is from Ram Vaidya. In the light of greater automation, what will parental care and the family environment look like? Will we see more homeschooling?
I think there will be more homeschooling. There will be more choice.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great question, Ram Vaidya. And it's important that people can choose. I don't think there's a one right formula, and different families will have different circumstances, different outlooks. But I think there will be many families that will supplement what their children are learning in schools from additional information, different networks that they connect to, which can provide very important information. And by the way, the networks that are providing the best information today may not be the same as the networks that will be providing the best information even in a year or two's time. So parents need to be flexible there too.
Okay. And the next question is from Kishore. What will be the role of universities and other educational institutions in supporting and preparing people to enter the changing job market?
So universities, of course, are very important in society in helping people to transition from adolescence to adulthood, as it were. That experience is important. But I think that what universities teach will change. And instead of people needing a whole 3-year course, it's going to be more focused on what sometimes are called nano degrees. Nano literally means 1/1000th, but so it's not an exact description. But what people will need is the ability to quickly learn a particular skill for a particular job. So it's likely that universities, as they are set up today, will become less significant overall, and what will be more important is that people at any stage of their life can fairly quickly pick up whatever new skill is needed. The universities will adapt. Universities are social as well as just a technical forum, but increasingly too, many of the social aspects of universities can take place online as well, and some online universities will become very good at this, and they will encourage people to get together in social groups to advance their learning too. So I expect universities will change a lot as well in the next 20 years, and some will fail and some will thrive.
Following up on that one, David, we have a question from Vishruti and Hari. How can we prepare for the rapid changes that is going on? Do individuals need to take responsibility for their own skill development?
Well, as you probably guessed, I don't think any individual can keep on top of all these changes by him or herself. I think we need to develop the skill of collaboration. We need to connect into communities or into partnerships that will help to provide us with the skills or the insight that's important. And if we try and learn it all as individuals, it's quite daunting. So, of course, we have our own responsibility. Each of us are humans and we should not shirk our responsibility. But in reality, we are stronger when we are interdependent than when we are independent. And if we find the right groups of people to share that interdependency with, and again, I may say that right groups of people may change over periods of time. If we can do that, we are more likely to be successful in our career progression.
Okay. Just following on that, from Sumit, with the developments in all these areas of technology, should we be letting robots and AI systems make ethical decisions for us?
Well, I think there are dangers in that because any systems are limited in what they can understand. I do think, however, we should be listening to suggestions made by robots and automated systems, but we humans should then take the final decisions. It's a little bit like what's meant to happen in the UK Parliament. You know, in the UK Parliament, there's a House of Commons and a House of Lords, and the House of Lords is full up of people who, in principle, are pretty expert. And they're allowed to offer revisions on the policies proposed by the House of Commons. And so the House of Commons comes up with some bill and the Lords offer revisions of it. And in the end, the House of Commons takes the decision, and they can, if they wish, overrule and ignore what the House of Lords say. But they should listen to it because on the whole, it's often very thoughtful. So I see something similar in the future. We might even have a House of AI to sit alongside the House of Commons, in which all the political possibilities are given some advice by AI. But in the end, we humans should take the decisions because for at least the next period of time, at least AIs will only have an incomplete understanding of general knowledge. As I said, that's one area which is particularly hard for AIs to cover.
That would be very interesting to see in the future, David, having a House of AI, House of Lords in place of it. Just following on that one, how will automation and growth of AI affect care of the elderly and those with disabilities? This question is from Prakash Nanda.
So it's a great question. It used to be said that people would never want robots or automation to look after their elderly family members. That would be a terribly degrading thing. Well, guess what? In some parts of the world, this is starting to happen. And many human caregivers are actually grateful for the chance to not have to provide 100% of the care themselves. There are certain things that can be provided by robots of various sorts. So I can mention one robot which isn't yet released, but which may be released quite soon. Her name is Grace. She is a sort of sister of one that's a little bit more famous or notorious called Sophia. It comes from a company based in Hong Kong, and it has been demonstrated around the world with some rudimentary intelligence, ability to engage in conversations. And Grace has been developed to help with elder care, and there are already some encouraging signs. Another example is that there are patients with dementia. It would be good for them if they could have a pet to look after, but often a real pet is too difficult. But there are robotic seals. I think the name of it is Paro, and they can reach parts of a demented person which other interactions couldn't reach. So there's cases of people who hadn't spoken for maybe 2 years. And then they got introduced to a robotic seal. And when the nurse at the end said, well, it's time for Paro to leave you now, the person spoke for the first time in 2 years and gave an intelligent sentence as well. So there is the role of AI in there. Now, we've got to be thoughtful about it, as in all areas. There are possibilities of mistakes coming, but there are also possibilities to actually help humans in these difficult roles.
Okay, just stick on to another question from AI. This question is from Akshaya. If AI should come to take over jobs requiring compassion or ethical judgment, example in healthcare, how can cognitive bias be overcome in developing such technology?
Well, I'm glad we got onto this question of cognitive bias. There is a lot of unintentional bias in many of the systems which we have today, which is why many of them are not really fit for purpose. And it will be a mistake to put too much trust in any of these systems. So what we can have is that they will make suggestions, but then humans should be vetting and checking to ensure. And we should also have systems. One AI system can be vetting another from a different point of view to guard against unintentional bias. Now, in the future, I think our AI is going to change. Currently, too much of it operates in what's called a black box mode, but there are many initiatives to have explicable AI, or sometimes called explainable AI, in which is more able to explain the reasons for its decisions. Now, again, I don't think we should take all these reasons automatically on trust. We should have people checking them, because there are big risks of trusting a powerful system. It might be right 99 times in a row, and we might let our guard down, and then the 100th time it may mislead us. After all, who hasn't been surprised by what their sat nav has occasionally told them? We trust our sat nav so well, we stop thinking about it, and then it's led us into a cycle lane. It was very embarrassing. It's led, and so we still need to think about it. But over time, as we have better AI, I think the frequency of badly biased decisions will reduce, but we should never be lazy about it. We should continue to vet it.
Sure. We'll take this final last question, David, before we move on to closing remarks. This question is from Pav. No-code or low-code platforms can, in theory, empower all to use technology to create automated solutions. To what extent can these platforms replace traditional developments?
Well, I think we should look at these platforms as augmenting our human capabilities in all areas. And we should take a decision as to what extent we are going to trust these platforms more, to what extent we will put less effort into the human systems. But this is all about enabling humans to have a richer and more fulfilling and lives of greater flourishing, greater experiences. We have to think about what we're getting out of it. If we go into the future on a kind of cruise control, we are likely going to end up in a destination that we did not, that we're not happy with. So let's keep thinking hard about it. And just because a platform has done good things in the past, it doesn't mean we should trust it unconditionally in the future as it becomes more powerful. No, we need to keep thinking hard about it and reflecting from multiple points of view about it.
Sure. Unfortunately, we need to come to, we have to close this discussion and coming to the end, David. I'm sure we have a few more questions to cover, especially on the reskilling and some other topics, but we'll move on to your closing remarks. According to you, what should individuals do to prepare for the future and help them to flourish in the individually, with the family, and which as a society? How they should be preparing for the future?
So all individuals need to start having a more realistic picture of what's possible in the future. And sadly, many of the science fiction films that we see aren't actually very realistic. They're good for entertainment, but they will be misleading us. So we need to all wise up as to what's possible. I can't be sure what will definitely happen, but we need to become more aware of what's possible coming down the line. And to do this, it's helpful to connect to communities who are full of people who have thought hard about this and who vet each other's suggestions. So I encourage everybody to find a community or to strengthen parts of your existing community to have more foresight skills in them. So that's the part of it. And then choose your social circles wisely, not just because these are people that you've been with historically, but you want to, of course, help people to whom you feel a strong attachment, but equally you need to be aware that the more time that we spend with various people, the more they influence us. And we want to be sure that we're influenced by the people who will help us to have a better understanding of the future possibilities and who will help us to be empowered to take advantage. And so learn about the scenarios and learn about the communities that can help. And each person can find their own answers to these questions, in my view.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much for joining us today. Just to summarize, I think it is not only difficult, but impossible to predict the future. But we can always explore ideas and plan based on the best available information. We hope today's Manthan provided you some ideas to explore further. With new advancements, hope technology will liberate humanity further from day-to-day activities and makes the society prosperous, safe, and secure. But currently, we are seeing the trend, and we will have more time and resources in our hands. It will be up to us how we use these resources to flourish as an individual, along with family and society. Either we use these resources for personal development, to explore arts and culture, or spend time helping the communities, making this world much better. Thank you, everyone who joined us today from wherever you are. Just about VM, Vichar Manthan is a voluntary-led organization. Our Karyakartas not only give their time and effort, but also many of them are well-wishers too. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all our well-wishers, without whom the work we do would not be possible. If anyone watching would like to become an well-wisher, either by donating one-off or on a regular interval, please use the QR code that is displayed on the screen, or you can use the link that is posted in the comment section. Before you leave today, you can also subscribe to our channel by clicking on the subscribe button on YouTube screen. To hear more about our events in advance, please subscribe to our mailing list, which is www.vicharmanthan.org/mailing list. VM also runs book clubs across the country, and recently we started another initiative, VM Podcast. If you want to find more details about book clubs or in the podcast, please log in into our website. Again, it is vicharmanthan.org. Our next event will be in 2 weeks' time. It is there a problem with porn? Hope to see you all there. And once again, thank you very much and namaste.